You ever have that moment where you're standing there, watching something you built with your own hands, something that protected your home, get destroyed by people who think they're above everyone else? That was me, the morning the HOA showed up at my door with sledgehammers, fake cops, and fake orders, all for a better view. But what they didn't know was that Mother Nature was already loading her revenge. It started like any other morning. The ocean was calm, the gulls were circling lazy figure eights over the tide, and my coffee cup steamed gently in the breeze. I'd built this seawall myself, reinforced, city permitted, every bolt inspected. It wasn't just a wall, it was a promise to my wife Martha. After that storm in '09 nearly swallowed our yard, she couldn't sleep without hearing phantom waves crash against the patio. So I designed a barrier that could withstand a Category 4 search. And for 15 years, it did. Until they came. The HOA. Karen Duval, the president, lived 3 houses down, perched higher on the bluff. She had that kind of arrogance money gives people who never built anything themselves. She called my wall industrial looking, said it clashed with the coastal aesthetic. Translation? It ruined the background of her real estate photos. A week before the chaos, I'd gotten one of those ridiculous violation notices zip-tied to my gate. Structure obstructs shared community view. Shared with who? The Pelicans? My property sat at the far end of the bluff. No one's sight line was blocked, unless you counted Karen's. So I went to the clubhouse. Walked right into her office. She was sitting there like a queen guarding her throne, surrounded by filing cabinets and fake ferns. I laid out my permits on the desk. City seal, raised stamp, signed engineer approval. She didn't even glance down. "Frank," she said with that sugar-coated venom, "the HOA has new aesthetic standards. You'll need to comply." Comply. I'd spent my life designing systems that save people from floods, from infrastructure collapse, from the power of nature. I'd earned every gray hair on my head from doing things the right way. And now some petty dictator with a clipboard thought she could erase that with a pen stroke. I took a breath. "Karen, this wall is legal. It's permitted. You don't have the authority." She smiled, slow, thin, and cruel. "You have 30 days to remove it, or we will." She wasn't bluffing. 5 days later, the ground outside my window trembled. Not from waves. From engines. A demolition truck. 2 men with sledgehammers. One with a clipboard. When I stepped outside, the foreman handed me a sheet. It looked official, city logo, urgent stamp, structural risk warning. But I'd seen too many authentic documents in my life to be fooled. The seal was flat. The signature? Fake. And then I saw her, Karen, standing across the street with her arms folded, sunglasses on, and that smirk. The kind of smirk that said she thought she'd won. The first sledgehammer hit concrete and the sound tore through me. Every crack echoed years of sweat, blueprints, memory. I shouted, I argued, but the private security officers she brought along were fake too. Uniforms from a costume store, badges that didn't reflect right in the sun. I called the police, but by the time a real officer showed up, half the wall was gone. The demolition crew left as if nothing happened. Karen waved from her car, said, "Enjoy the view, Frank," and drove off. The next morning I found the bluff bleeding. The sea had already eaten 3 feet of sand where the wall once stood. Nature wastes no time. But here's the thing, the ocean doesn't forget. That wall didn't just protect me. It stabilized the cliff line for the entire street. The structural load was shared between my foundation and theirs. Without it, the water had a direct path beneath the bluff. I tried to warn them. I filed complaints, called the city, even hired an independent geologist who confirmed my fears. One major swell and the base layer would collapse like soggy paper. Karen sent me a cease and desist letter for spreading panic. Then she listed her house for sale. That's when I realized, this wasn't about aesthetics. She knew something was coming. The HOA had plans to redevelop the coast for new high-end villas, and my wall was standing in the way of their coastal expansion zoning. They didn't just destroy my protection. They destroyed the buffer for the entire neighborhood. And the ocean was waiting. 3 weeks later, the storm rolled in. The forecast said moderate rainfall. The tide chart said otherwise. The Pacific doesn't roar, it growls first. The wind started at midnight, then came the waves. At 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My back fence, gone. The sea was reaching. But my foundation held. I'd rebuilt a small temporary barrier out of sandbags and concrete boards. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Down the bluff, the HOA street lights flickered, then cut out. By dawn, the news helicopters were overhead. The ocean had taken back everything it was owed. Karen's $1 million home, the one she called a testament to community unity, now hung halfway over the cliff, its foundation dangling like snapped bones. The other homes along the HOA row? Gone. Swept clean. The same people who laughed when they destroyed my wall were now screaming for help. And I stood at my window, coffee in hand, watching the waves settle. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. But I did record. Because people need to see what happens when greed, vanity, and arrogance go to war with nature. The footage made national news. The fake demolition order? Exposed. The security officers? Arrested. Karen herself? Charged with fraud, falsifying city documents, and destruction of private property. When the reporters asked me if I felt bad for her, I said, I warned her. Some lessons you can't teach with words. You have to let the ocean speak. And that day it spoke loud enough for the whole world to hear. When the tide finally receded, there was nothing left of the HOA homes, just splintered decks and floating shutters. My rebuilt wall, scarred but standing, was the only thing left on the bluff. And every time I walk along it now, I think of Martha, and that promise I made her. That she'd always be safe here. Even if the world had to drown to learn what safety really means. The morning after the storm, the air didn't smell like salt anymore. It smelled like wet wood and regret. The entire bluff looked different now, like the ocean had reached up during the night and rearranged the coastline to remind everyone who really owned it. From my kitchen window, I could see pieces of siding tangled in driftwood. A neighbor's porch railing, someone's garden bench, even a refrigerator door bobbing in the foam below. My wall was battered but still there, cracked, chipped, and defiant. The silence after chaos is always the loudest sound. You'd think people would be outside helping one another, but not this time. The surviving HOA members were gathered up the street, huddled under umbrellas, whispering to each other like scared children caught cheating on a test. Their leader, Karen Duval, stood apart, arms folded, staring at what used to be her backyard. Half her patio was gone. The ocean had eaten through the bluff beneath her house, and her pool, her precious infinity pool, now poured directly into the Pacific. When she finally noticed me watching from my porch, she turned and yelled, "Are you happy now, Frank?" Her voice cracked against the wind. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Nature had already answered for me. But I knew this wasn't over. Because people like Karen never take responsibility. They find someone else to blame. And in her mind, that someone was me. By noon, 2 city trucks rolled up. Orange cones. Clipboards. Workers in reflective jackets. They weren't demolition crews, they were inspectors. And they looked angry. I walked out to meet them. One of them, a younger guy with a close-cropped beard, pointed to my house. "You Frank Hale?" "Yes," I said. He pulled out a tablet and scrolled through a list. "We need to talk about a demolition order that came from your property 3 weeks ago." I frowned. "Demolition order? You mean the fake one?" He looked up sharply. "So you know it was fake?" "I knew the second I saw it," I said. "I told them it wasn't real, but they—" He raised a hand to stop me. "Sir, we checked. That document never came from our office. It was forged. But it used our exact permit numbers. One's tied to a pending redevelopment application for this neighborhood." My stomach tightened. "Redevelopment?" He nodded grimly. "Yeah. Someone's been filing city-level paperwork to rezone the bluff for high-density coastal housing. Looks like your HOA was in on it. Your wall stood in the way of that plan. And there it was. The truth I'd suspected from the start. It was never about views. It was about money." The inspector stepped closer. "We're going to need you to testify, Mr. Hale. That forgery is a federal offense. Whoever submitted it used falsified city seals and impersonated our department head. This isn't a slap-on-the-wrist violation. It's criminal." Behind us, Karen's voice sliced through the air. "You can't believe him. He's been harassing me for years." I turned. She was stomping down the street, hair tangled, face pale, but that arrogance still clinging to her like wet paint. The inspector squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, we'll speak with you in a moment." She ignored him and jabbed a finger at me. "You did this, Frank. You sabotaged the drainage. You wanted this to happen." I took a step forward, calm but sharp. "You forged a city order to destroy a safety structure. You brought fake officers. You laughed while they demolished it. And now you want to blame me for the consequences." Her lip trembled, not from guilt but rage. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You think the HOA's just going to vanish because of one storm?" The inspector spoke before I could. "Ma'am, you should worry less about the HOA and more about the criminal charges we're about to file." Her eyes widened. "Charges?" He nodded. Forgery, impersonation of a government official, destruction of permitted infrastructure, fraud, and endangerment. We'll also be reviewing your personal role as the signature authority on those documents. For the first time, Karen Duval didn't have a comeback. Her face drained of color. That was the first day the city started digging into the HOA's books. And the deeper they went, the uglier it got. Turns out, Karen and 2 other board members had been rerouting HOA maintenance funds into a private shell account tied to a development firm, one that didn't exist on any public registry. The fake demolition order was part of their scheme to clear properties and resell the land at profit once storm risk zones forced residents out. But the storm arrived before they could cash in. Poetic in a way. That night, the local news ran the headline, "Tsunami exposes HOA fraud. Illegal demolition preceded cliff collapse." The footage I'd recorded, the fake cops, the sledgehammers, the wall cracking, aired during primetime. My phone didn't stop ringing for days. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted statements. Neighbors wanted forgiveness. I didn't give any of them what they wanted. Because my story wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and how easily it gets buried under paperwork, signatures, and arrogance. A week later, the city council called an emergency session. They needed testimony. I stood there under the harsh lights of the meeting hall, looking out at faces that had once called me a nuisance. Now they stared like I was some kind of prophet. I cleared my throat and began. When you build something to keep people safe, you don't expect it to become the reason they turn on you. But that's what happens when power goes unchecked. They didn't just tear down a wall, they tore down the line between community and corruption. Every word hung heavy in the air. Even the reporters were quiet. After my testimony, the city revoked the HOA's charter. Their insurance collapsed. And the properties on that bluff? Condemned until stabilization measures could be rebuilt, by the city this time, not private hands. Karen was arrested 2 days later. The image of her being led out of her half-collapsed mansion in handcuffs was plastered across every local paper. She shouted something about defamation and revenge as they pushed her into the cruiser, but nobody cared anymore. The world had moved on. Months passed. The ocean, as always, kept breathing against the shore. My wall, patched and reinforced by city engineers, now bore a bronze plaque. Red. In memory of those who ignored warnings, and the man who didn't. But peace didn't come easy. Every storm since then sounded a little louder, every gust of wind through the eaves a little sharper. I'd wake up at night and swear I could still hear the echo of that first sledgehammer. Until one evening, something unexpected happened. I got a letter. Not from the city. From a lawyer in San Diego. It was a notice of civil forfeiture, for the former HOA estate. Turns out, part of the property line had shifted after the erosion, and the new coastal maps placed my boundary nearly 30 feet farther west. The ocean had redrawn the land, and given me back what was once theirs. Their oceanfront. My justice. Sometimes karma doesn't whisper. Sometimes it crashes like a wave. The news wanted one last interview, a final word on the whole affair. I agreed, but I told them I only had one message left to give. They set up cameras by the seawall, mics clipped to my shirt, wind rustling the mic foam. The reporter asked softly, "Do you feel vindicated, Mr. Hale?" I looked out at the horizon. The water glimmered gold in the setting sun, gentle now, like it was pretending innocence. "I don't feel vindicated," I said slowly. "I feel reminded. Nature always keeps score. You can break laws, you can forge papers, you can destroy walls, but you can't outsmart the tide." The camera light flicked off. The crew packed up. And as they left, I stayed behind, listening to the waves roll in, one after another, steady, eternal. The HOA had thought they could buy peace with paperwork. But peace isn't a form you file. It's something you earn. And on that bluff, with the sea wind in my hair and the sound of justice in the surf, I knew. Some walls are worth rebuilding. There's something about the ocean after a disaster. It looks calmer, almost sorry. Like it knows what it did and is pretending innocence again. But I've worked with the sea long enough to know better. The ocean doesn't apologize. It reminds. Months passed since the storm. The city called it a natural disaster. But I knew better. It wasn't nature's wrath, it was human arrogance inviting nature's revenge. The bluff had changed forever. 3 homes gone. 2 condemned. 1 standing, mine. The house with the ugly seawall. The morning fog hung low across the coast as I walked out to check the reconstruction site. The city engineers were rebuilding the slope, driving steel piles deep into the cliff. I'd volunteered as a consultant. Old habits die hard. Watching those machines groan and hammer steel into the earth felt strangely peaceful. Order returning after chaos. Then I saw it. The bronze plaque gleaming on the repaired wall. In memory of those who ignored warnings, and the man who didn't. I didn't ask for that inscription. Someone from the city had put it there. But every time I read it, I thought of Martha. I could almost hear her soft voice saying, "See? You did the right thing." I used to drink my morning coffee in silence, watching her garden bloom beside the wall. Now I watched excavators and concrete mixers. Different sound, same rhythm. But peace never stays unchallenged. Not for long. One afternoon, as I was reviewing survey plans at my dining table, I heard a knock at the door. Slow, hesitant. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, soaked from sea spray, clutching a messenger bag. "Mr. Hale?" she asked. "Yes." She took a breath. "I'm Rachel Duval, Karen's daughter." I felt the air tighten. Her eyes, brown, sharp, familiar, had the same fire her mother once had, but without the cruelty. She continued softly, "My mother's in county jail. She asked me to give you this." She held out a thick envelope. I hesitated before taking it. "What's inside?" She looked down. "Letters. And something else." She said it was proof she wasn't the only one involved. For a moment I wanted to close the door. I'd had enough of HOA drama, enough of forged papers, fake orders, and courtroom noise. But something in the girl's tone made me pause. It wasn't arrogance. It was shame. "Come in," I said. We sat at the table as rain began to patter against the glass. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were several handwritten letters, all in Karen's looping cursive. And beneath them a flash drive. The first letter started with shaky words. "Frank, if you're reading this, I assume the city already took everything from me. I deserve most of it, but not all. What we did wasn't just my idea. The real plan came from higher up, the Coastal Redevelopment Board." I frowned. "The CRB. A state-level planning committee," she went on. "They wanted the bluff cleared for private contractors before new zoning laws went into effect. They told us we'd be compensated for community cooperation." I was stupid enough to believe them. When I realized what was happening, it was too late. They forged the final papers under my signature. I took the fall because someone had to. But they'll keep doing this, in other towns, other coastlines. You were right about the wall. You always were. The letter trailed off. The flash drive was labeled CRB, Contracts. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen filled with documents, scanned invoices, email threads, payment schedules. Dozens of them. Every one stamped with an official seal and signed by city contractors. Only the signatures didn't match the records I knew. This wasn't just local corruption. It was a network. Developers, inspectors, state board members, all working together to demolish coastal properties under the guise of safety improvements. And my seawall was just the first domino. I leaned back, heart pounding slow and heavy. Karen had been a tyrant, but she wasn't the architect of all this. She was a pawn. I looked at Rachel. "Did you read these?" She nodded. I didn't know what to do. I'm not my mother. I just want to make it right. I nodded slowly. "Then we're going to expose this. Together." She looked at me startled. "Together?" I smiled faintly. "Your mom tore down my wall. Maybe you can help rebuild something better." That night, we sat in my study organizing files, tracing connections. Every link led back to the CRB office in Sacramento. Millions of dollars had been funneled into coastal maintenance projects that never existed. Entire neighborhoods were being condemned just to sell the land to private buyers. The same people who destroyed my home's protection were doing it across the coast. And I wasn't going to let that stand. The next morning, I called an old friend, Tom Reyes, an investigative journalist I'd worked with years ago on marine infrastructure reports. "Frank Hale," he said, voice half amused, half amazed. "You still stirring up storms?" "You could say that," I replied. "But this time it's literal." I sent him the documents. Within hours, his tone changed from playful to grave. "Frank," he said over the phone that night, "this is massive. I can verify half these names, real state officials, fake projects. You're sitting on a gold mine of evidence. If this goes public, it could end careers." "Then end them," I said quietly. The article hit 2 weeks later. Headline: Coastal Corruption Scandal. State Board linked to illegal HOA demolitions. It exploded. News vans lined the bluff. Helicopters thumped overhead. Karen's letters, Rachel's testimony, my footage, it all went viral. Hashtags trended for days. The CRB offices were raided by federal investigators. 3 senior officials resigned within 48 hours. And me? I sat on my porch, listening to the surf and wondering how something so big could start from something as small as a wall. But justice has ripples. A month later, I got a call from the state attorney's office. They wanted me to testify again, this time in Sacramento. When I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't the angry homeowner anymore. I was a witness for hundreds of families along the coast. I told the truth, every word of it. About the forged orders, the fake cops, the storm, the destruction, the corruption that reached higher than any of us had guessed. When it was over, the prosecutor thanked me. "You didn't just save your home, Mr. Hale," he said. "You saved the coast." The verdict came down 3 weeks later. Multiple convictions. Fines in the millions. Mandatory restitution funds for the affected homeowners. And in a rare twist of irony, the state ordered all future coastal communities to include mandatory seawall protection plans, modeled after mine. They named it the Hale Standard. When I read that, I laughed until my eyes watered. The same wall they called ugly. The same wall they said ruined the view. Now it was the blueprint for safety across the entire Pacific coast. Rachel came by a few months later. She stood by the plaque, hair blowing in the wind. "She was wrong about a lot of things," she said softly. "But she was right about one. The view is better now." I turned to her. "Not because the wall's gone." She smiled faintly. "Because we finally see the truth." We stood there in silence, the tide rolling in slow and steady. The ocean didn't look angry anymore. It looked proud. I rebuilt the house over time, smaller, sturdier, grounded. I didn't want luxury. I wanted peace. And every morning when the sun hit that seawall, I felt Martha there. Like the ocean itself was keeping its promise. Then one evening, just before sunset, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, old, water-damaged, but clear enough to make me smile. It was the original blueprint for my seawall, the one I'd lost during the demolition. And across the top, in faded ink, someone had written a single line. "For those who build what others destroy." I stood on the bluff, the wind tugging at the paper, and watched the horizon glow orange and gold. That's when it hit me. Walls don't just hold back the ocean. They hold back fear, doubt, corruption. The tide of everything that tries to tear down what's right. The HOA had wanted to erase my wall for vanity. The developers wanted to erase it for profit. The storm wanted to erase it for nature's balance. But still it stood. And in the end, maybe that's all we can do, build things that outlast greed. As the last light slipped below the water, I whispered, "Rest easy, Martha." We kept the promise. The waves answered in their eternal rhythm, neither kind nor cruel, just honest. Because the ocean always remembers. And now, so will they. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed watching karma crash down on that HOA, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment about what you'd do if this happened to you. Your support keeps these stories rolling. See you in the next one.